I do think even at the earliest stages, you don't necessarily have to convince any VC at that stage that you're the market leader. You have to convince them that you have the potential to be the market leader because you have all the other ingredients in place. And then it becomes a judgment call. That's why VC is always art, not science. There's some human element in this. There's a judgment, there's personal relationships that you build over time. And that, I think it's very important, in some sense, the network you have, but also how you've treated people. Like, when we talk to founders, we do reference checks.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
Here in the health tech industry, we tend to be very science-oriented. But my guest today, Nagraj Kashyap, says the science of investing in health tech companies is actually more of an art. It's contradictory, I know. But if there's anyone qualified to say so, it's Nagraj. As managing partner at SoftBank, Nagraj decides what companies are best to form long-term investment relationship with all day, every day. So, you are an entrepreneur looking for investors? This episode is really for you. Today, we talk about what he looks for in a startup, best pitching strategies, and the importance of community. Here's our conversation. Well, thanks for joining me this morning, Nagraj.
Thank you, Christine, for hosting me. Look forward to it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation today. And so I thought you have quite an interesting background that takes you where you are today in SoftBank. And if you can walk us through about what's your background, what's your journey that takes you to where you are today?
Yeah, I'm happy to. There's a long version, the short version. I'll go with the short version. I'm, like many others in the tech industry, an immigrant. So I landed up in Austin to do my master's in computer science. So I started life as an engineer after graduating. Pretty soon, in 3 to 4 years, I realized that a new crop of engineers coming after me, much smarter than me. So I moved to a business school. I got my MBA and then did a stint in management consulting. Again, I really like management consulting. I got to do different things every 3 to 6 months. It was a lot of fun. I learned about many different industries, including healthcare. I did a few interesting healthcare assignments, but also realized that I wanted to do something which was more sustainable for me and the family. And I switched to my first venture job right then. And then it was right at the time Qualcomm in San Diego, where I'm now based, was starting up a venture group. They asked me to join. I joined as one of the founding members, and within about 12 months or so, I was leading the group. I led that for about 13 years or so, built that into a fairly large organization that operated across 7 different geographies. It's US, obviously, where we started, Europe, India, China, Korea, Brazil, Israel. So it's a very large group, and we did primarily, I would say, consumer investments that included healthcare as well, medtech, healthcare, all consumer, and we had a pretty successful run there. A lot of lessons learned, but had a pretty successful run. And then I was asked to do something similar at Microsoft. So I switched from being I would say, an all consumer investor to almost entirely an enterprise investor. And I started M12, which is Microsoft's venture arm, in 2016. And then when SoftBank called, I figured I have one more thing to do in my career. So after doing consumer and enterprise, early stage and early growth, I joined SoftBank to do everything at the later stages. So I do now consumer, digital health. I do enterprise as well, of course, at a later stage. So that's sort of in a nutshell the journey. Along the way, lots of successes, but many more mistakes as well that I've learned from that have helped me with successes in the future. So I'm happy to talk about anything during this journey.
Yeah, so maybe let's just dive in about your SoftBank. What does it cover? What is the focus? And it said something about you're in the vision fund. What does that mean? Well, I feel like when somebody's vision fund tend to be more like the very early stage. I could be wrong.
Yes, so the Vision Fund is not an early stage vehicle. So I joined SoftBank in 21 with Vision Fund 2. Vision Fund 1 was the big $100 billion vehicle that Masasan started. That sort of really changed the venture landscape. Prior to that, most of the growth funds were typically under $2 billion in total AUM. I think there was a number of value firms that had growth arms and some growth specialists. But when SoftBank Vision Fund 1 started, it was to realize Masa's vision, really, that where it came from, that AI and machine learning will fundamentally change the world. And I think he was making a bet that startups that used a lot of AI and machine learning as the core of their tech practice would result in changes and disruptions, both traditional industries, existing, even new tech industries. And so that was sort of the idea behind the Vision Fund. No, I was not part of Vision Fund 1, so I don't typically talk about Vision Fund 1, but I wanted to give you some history. By the time I joined the Fund 2, which is why the Vision Fund 2, and that's a little bit of a different vehicle. Vision Fund 1 had external LPs like traditional funds, and Vision Fund 1 is entirely invested out of SoftBank.
So Fund 2 is mostly investor.
It's all SoftBank capital.
SoftBank, right. Okay. So what are the focus areas that they're interested in?
Yeah, SoftBank is global investing, global investing VC. So we have got presence, on the ground presence in the US, in Europe, in Israel, in Japan, China, and Southeast Asia through Singapore. That's like a pretty global footprint. We've done investments in Korea as well, in Brazil as well. So there's a big footprint. And so for me, I'm part of the US managing partner team, and my focus is the US, as you can imagine. And within the US, generally speaking, a third of my portfolio is consumer internet. Another third is digital health, and I would say another third is more software, SaaS software, enterprise, mid markets, small medium businesses. So it's sort of generally divided into those. The percentages may vary, but those are the three things I end up doing in my practice. But some of my partners will do life sciences investing. Some of them will do a lot more e-commerce. There's fintech as well within the US practice, but my practice is limited to the three I mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So for the sake of our listener, many of our listeners tend to be more focused on the healthcare side, digital health in your case. Tell us more about what are within that space, what are the things that you are interested in, and what are the things that you saw that was pique your interest for the past few months?
Yeah, so for the past about 14 months or so since I joined, we have focused what I would call primarily in preventative wellness and preventative care. So I think we're looking to back companies that are helping, in the early stages, as not in the when you already are sick, but how do you make sure you don't either get sick through, so more wellness oriented, and examples of those are companies like Whoop, which I'm wearing right now, which tells you how you're doing every day, what kind of strain you're taking on. Company like Tempo, which is an in-home exercise, I call it device machine that helps you a Peloton like do workouts in the house. And then that's on the wellness spectrum. And then on the preventative spectrum, which is making sure that things are caught early in the life cycle of any kind of disease. We have companies like City Block Health, which is helping Medicaid patients be more engaged early on through technology, meeting them where they are, and making sure they don't get too sick that the only option they have is go to urgent care or emergency rooms. So again, early intervention. Companies like LME, which provide free autism assessments and are helping match children with therapists. When before we did the LME investment, what we found was in the US, it takes an average of 18 months to find match a therapist to a kid who's been diagnosed, and that's like too long for a developed nation like the U.S. So again, this kind of area is where technology can really help. That's another example of more trying to intervene early in the process. Now, again, two examples, but as I said, we tend to focus more on the wellness and preventative care at SoftBank.
Mm-hmm. And what stage do you guys come in?
Well, traditionally, our stage has been what I would call Series C and beyond. But it's very hard in today's market to say what does a Series C mean or what does a Series B mean. What we tend to say to companies is, typically we will come in when the company is in the stage of complete product market fit. They're looking to expand sales and marketing and sort of expand their markets. Maybe some of the companies are going, they've got a good footprint in the US. They want to expand outside the US, or they've got a good footprint in some states in the US where they have won contracts and they want to increase the number of states and geography they have. Or they just want to grow and scale the companies. And typically, those companies are looking anywhere upwards of $50 million, raising upwards of $50 million to all the way to 300. So we will come in at a stage where companies have the capacity to consume capital at that stage. If you're starting out and for the next 12 months, you're looking to spend, 10 to $15 million, that's too early for us in generally speaking. So we can say Series C and beyond is the general, I would say, nomenclature I would give. But today's market, things have gotten very confusing in terms of what the labels mean. So we tend to say companies are looking to scale and need higher amounts of capital is when we tend to intersect.
Okay, and so tell us. I forgot to ask you, how big is Fund 2?
Right now, Fund 2, I think publicly we've disclosed we are a $56 billion fund is what I can say. So $56 billion fund, which makes us, I believe, in the top 3 largest tech funds.
That's great. So you have the experience of being in a Qualcomm and Microsoft and a SoftBank, and with SoftBank being probably the largest number in terms of sizes. What are the things that you see the similarities and the differences in terms of the approach of all the 3 different places?
Yeah, the approach, all 3 places is not that much different. We are still backing technology. We're backing founders who are using technology to advance the state of whether it's healthcare or enterprise software, consumer internet. So it's the underlying themes are very similar. I mean, I was in different eras of innovation. The era of innovation in Qualcomm was different than the era of innovation at M12 and Microsoft, and now at SoftBank. But fundamentally, we're trying to invest in the best founders, the best teams that have the biggest total addressable market in their specific areas. And that, I think we tend to invest. Probably the one difference I would say with SoftBank and my previous areas, I was doing somewhat earlier stage work. In the earlier stage work, you can't really say that this company is definitively number 1 or number 2 in their area. At our stage, we do look for that. We tend to invest in market leaders. By the time we come in, it has become fairly evident which company is leading that particular market or sector that we're investing in. So we tend to pick the companies that have already done well in their early stages, and then we provide them the the resources and the capital to further expand on that. So that probably would be the one difference. But the underlying things we look for the same things that every other VC would look for. We look for great founding teams. If there's a prior track record, that's great. We look for diverse founders. That's a big focus of ours as well. So there's a lot of things that every other one looked at in my previous 2 roles. We look at it. Here we have the opportunity to come in a little bit later, so we can actually figure out which companies are leading the sector, and we then double down.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Rudnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that help life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownrudnick.com. This podcast is also sponsored by Canon Quality Group, Canon Quality Group has been helping medtech startups set up quality management systems for over 10 years. If you're unsure when to get started with quality management in your startup, turn to the experts at canonqualitygroup.com.
It's interesting what you mentioned about when the early stage, it's hard to know who's the leader. And many of our audience are an early stage company. And I mean, if you have, as also being an investor, when there's so many of them, how do you differentiate yourself so that you look or you make the investors believe that you are the market leader? Like, what are the things to stand out?
Yeah, so I think it's obviously harder. I can talk through all the stages, and I think at our stage, it is generally easier to show you're the leader because you have the data to show. Earlier stages, you're differentiating based on your founding team, your expertise in the specific area, and essentially some amount of product market fit. You have to show that you've basically landed customers, either if you're a consumer or enterprise customer base, and that consumer cohort is growing, it's scaling, and that there's good data behind it. I think there's many examples of companies that maybe started out almost exactly the same time, but then there was one that broke out, the others didn't. So I think as long as you are operating with a team that actually is working well together, you're operating in a sector or a market that any VC would look at, say the TAM is big, then and you have some product market fit already, I do think even at the earliest stages, you don't necessarily have to convince any VC at that stage that you're the market leader. You have to convince them that you have the potential to be the market leader because you have all the other ingredients in place. And then it becomes a judgment call. That's why VC is always art, not science. I mean, if it was science and if it was a series of steps in an algorithm, then I wouldn't have a job. And I think that would not be the best way to do things. I think there's some human element in this. There's a judgment. There's personal relationships that you build over time, and that I think it's very important. In some sense, the network you have, but also how you've treated people. Like when we talk to founders, we do reference checks. If you come across as somebody who's a sort of presents well, but in the background, doesn't treat people well, you will find out. So it's not like you can sort of get away with things like that. So you have to build this up not only from a company perspective, but from a leader as well, how you treat people. That's a very key area for us. And it's actually even more important in the earlier stages, because if you're not the right kind of leader, well, you're not going to become the market leader as well. So I think there's that transition of how you can build a company culture, build leadership ability that takes you to the next step, where somebody like SoftBank come and say, these guys are clearly the leaders. We want to back them. And the management team has proven that out by scaling to this point. But you can only scale if you've got the right process and culture in place. But at the early stages, that's where some of the art comes in. I do think I've seen companies present the right set of things in the early stages where we have backed them. Some of it is also your prior experiences. You talked about mistakes. In healthcare, I was early in my career, I made what I would call the right kind of company in the right kind of market, but the wrong business model bet. I bet on a company that was doing continuous monitoring for diabetes. Obviously, everybody is known for many, many years that diabetes is one of the worst chronic problems in the US, and you have to monitor it. It's a constant thing for people who suffer from diabetes. And so the right approach when I saw it was, yeah, there's a company that helps you monitor this remotely, continuously. Your doctor will get the alerts. But guess what? The business model and the go-to-market was not the right one. So we didn't actually. We were there with the very Sequoia, which is a very early stage firm. Both of us made the same mistake. We had the right market in mind. We had the right disease in mind in terms of what to solve. But we didn't realize that you can't go through primary care providers for this. They don't have the time for it. They won't sell. And who pays for it was not clear. So when I went to enterprise investing a little bit, I kind of came across Livongo. And when I saw Livongo, they were actually solving the same problem, but their go-to-market model was actually the right model. And so it didn't take me that long at that point in time to say, yes, I want to back Livongo, because they're going to employers and saying, this is good for your employees. So the employers actually paid them. And that was a channel that Livongo unlocked. It's the same market that Telcare, which is the other company I initially funded, didn't work out in. Same market, same patient base, but the go-to-market model was so important. Mm-hmm. And if I had not necessarily, sort of made the mistake in the earlier, may not have recognized that Livongo was doing this right. Because initially they also had a device. And so many people are a little bit hesitant to fund companies when there's a device involved because there's hardware involved. But I'd gone through that exercise, and so I was able to sort of come to the right conclusion. It was proved right in the end as well. But I was able to come to the right conclusion that this is the right business model, because diabetes still has to be solved. It's the biggest chronic condition we have in the US. So that had not changed between my two investments. The only thing that changed was the founding team that had a lot more experience in the market, plus the go-to-market model they'd chosen.
So when going back to the business model with the other company that did not work out, I think I most likely at that point you assumed that would work out. Like, how could you avoid that mistake? Because I think with the Livongo story, it worked out. They unlocked that. But I think probably in the beginning, it's hard to know until their scale is like, oh, that worked out. Like,
no, you're right. I mean, look, I think it's easier to say in hindsight than at that point in time. So you're still making a judgment. I do think that's why in VC, we always say good investors are ones that don't make the same mistake again, are self-aware, they learn from it. There is really no magic formula, frankly speaking, but you do have to have some amount of pattern matching. And really, that's how you come across a higher percentage of winners than losers. That's all. I think you're trying to basically figure out, you are going to lose money in VC because it's a higher risk endeavor than public market investing or anything else. You're betting on sometimes unproven business models, like you said. So all you have to rely on is your experiences before you join VC, what you bring to the table, the mistakes you may have made, and the things you learn. And even if it's not mistakes, what you learn from other people, watching other people invest, what they look for, learning from them, and then making it your own heuristic, making it your own pattern, and then applying it. And I think that increases your chances that you're betting on the right place. So you're right. I couldn't have said that the Livongo go-to-market model will definitively work. I mean, that's not something you can make. What I could say was, I've seen what does not work. This is a huge improvement and can, in my mind, scale up more. My wife's a primary care physician, so I know that if somebody comes to her office one-off trying to sell this, maybe she'll say yes, maybe she'll say no, but it's a huge amount of effort to sort of sell into one primary care provider's office. While I go to an employer, I instantly get scale. So I think it's inherently a better model, but you're right. I couldn't have said definitively, but my pattern matching was telling me that this was a better model that could scale more faster with less capital instead of going to like the 700,000 primary care providers in the US or whatever the number is now. So that's not like the model that works. But, I think, again, it's hindsight. So it looks like a good bet at this point. I think that's the best you can come up with, what patterns you've developed over time.
And almost things like when, making sales is expensive, it's costly. And I think what you were just saying, the touch point, if you have a fewer touch point, it saves you money and it goes to one to many rather than one to one. I think that seems...
It is. That there's trade-offs. The trade-off here is the sale takes longer. So if I'm going to go, for example, at Livongo, I introduced them to Microsoft because I wanted, we had an investment, but also Microsoft would be a good benefit for Microsoft to offer to their employees. It took like about 9 months to close that account. So it takes longer. But, when you close that, you get a instant scale. So that's, I think, the trade-off in the two models. But it is, in the long run, more efficient because also sticky. It's unlikely that if it works, that a company like Microsoft is going to churn off the service, and the employees are already used to the service. They're deriving benefits, harder to take it away. But if I'm a primary care provider and I'm not making revenue out of this service, at some point I'll say, no, it's not worth it. But I already, you as a company have spent so much effort trying to sell them, and if they don't see the benefit, they'll just churn off. So I think it's not as sticky as well in situations where you're going after I would say, primary care providers directly. So again, it depends on the business model. Many times, what's sticky, but there's trade-offs in every model. There's no one model that works all the time. That's right. So I think with City Block as well, we've seen we take on large contracts, and then we have to go to the patients individually, to reach them individually, to make sure that they're getting care. But we are not selling to the patients directly. We're selling to one provider that then sort of offloads the risk to Cityblock, and Cityblock manages that by making sure patient engagement through technology is best in class. So at some point, it becomes Cityblock's responsibility to make sure these patients that they took on, but they take on all the patients at scale. So they don't have to go one patient acquiring one patient at a time. They acquire thousands of patients at the same time. So that's a more efficient channel, but then you still have to have the patient engagement. So even in the case of Livongo, if as an individual employee I'm not get the benefit, then I know at some point that nobody's using it. So you still have to, in all these models, you still have to treat the consumer at the end of the thing really well. Because if he or she does not see the benefit, then ultimately even your customer will say, like, no, none of my customers, none of my employees, and none of my patients are seeing benefit, then I'm going to churn off your thing. So it's more complicated than what I just explained, but I'm just saying that there's multiple constituents that you have to take care of during this process and make sure they're happy and engaged and continue seeing the benefits once you're sold into them.
Mm-hmm. And going back to what your comment earlier, when you do investment, you check reference. One of the things you said, like, how you treat people, do you treat them nicely? Why is that important?
Well, you realize that when you do an investment at any stage, you're doing an investment in a company that you will be with for, call it, a minimum of 4 years to maybe 10 years. You're in the boardroom, you're working with the founders and the management team. You will go through ups and downs. There is no such thing as a straight line. I have been in many successful companies, and we were seed investors in Zoom, which is a very good story. But none of these companies is a straight line. And when things are going well, then it's all good. When things are not going well, that's when personalities, how you treat other people, matter. If you're not equipped to do that, you're not going to be able to navigate in a manner that brings along all the parties that are required to support you during a time that is not working out well, whether it's the market conditions, whether it's your specific customer base is getting hurt, or you're having other issues. You need your employees to come along with you and support you. You need the rest of the management team. You need your investors and your board. And if you're not somebody who can bring all of these constituents along, you will not be successful and not get through the tough times that you will always face. As I said, there's no straight lines in venture. These are long journeys. And so you need to work with people that actually are, I would say, in some manner can treat you well and you treat them well, and they treat everybody else around them well. If you don't do that, then I call it life is too short. I mean, I'm not going to work with people that are not sort of at least share my ethos, share my values. That's when everybody's different. But from my investing style, because I view this as very long-term relationships, you have to have a little bit of a match on that front.
Yeah, I don't want to be. I totally agree with you, and I think life is too short to work with people who are not nice people, who don't treat other people respectfully and well. And then you hear the story about Steve Jobs, right? Where how he treats others, and that he becomes successful. And sometimes it gives the wrong message to the young people. I felt like, oh, you can be really nice to get what you want, and then you become successful. What do you say to that?
Well, I think I would say there's many examples in history of people who have who become successful despite not being, I would say, nice people. It's not a path that you can't take. I'm just saying that it's not a path that I'm there to support. So I think there's I would say, capital that can be put behind any kind of personality, any kind of venture. I'm just talking to you, like, if you come to pitch me, then I'm going to be looking for some things. And it doesn't mean that every VC looks for the exactly same thing. That's why we're all different. We have different perspectives. And that's healthy, by the way. I do think there's not one size fits all for anything in venture, and having such a diverse set of capital providers means that you will find your best match somewhere. And that's all I can say. Like, if that's my philosophy. It doesn't have to be, it's not, there's not a right philosophy, it's just my philosophy. And so I will say that if you, it does help you to, I think, find capital better. I think it's probably a bigger pool of providers of capital that will optimize on personality and fit than there is where I will definitely fund a company or founders that have obvious issues from how they treat people. I think you'll find people to fund you, I'm sure, but I think the pool of people is less.
Mhm. So I know we're running short on time. I also want to ask. You can all learn from mistakes that other people make, and success that other people make as well. Um, you know, being in the ventures, you've seen a lot of the company are successful and companies that are, not successful one. What are the common challenges that face them in the companies that fail that they cannot overcome?
Yeah, no, as I said, some companies fail because the going in business model or the go to market is just flawed. Like I gave the example, and I've also seen companies in my portfolio that have what I would call almost everything right. Whether it's the product is right, the people are good. I think the market is there. Timing is bad. Uh, Timing is a huge part of it. I was at Qualcomm when we were in the early days of smartphones, when smartphones were not prevalent. We funded at least a couple of companies at that time, which some iteration of those have become very successful in the last 5 years. But at that time, we were too early. And so there's so many factors that come into play here that when you learn from mistakes, you do have to look at other examples. And if you're starting a company, you look at our other examples of analogs that have had everything right, and then you have to also figure out you can't time everything, but you have to know that I think in some cases, if the timing is not right, then do you change course? Do you change course to do a little bit of a different pivot to a different product, to a different model, until the time is right? In some cases you can buy time, in some cases you can't. Some of the companies I funded, we couldn't buy time. The market wasn't ready, consumers weren't ready. It's sort of out of your hands. And then look, I think some companies will fail because none of these are right. The team didn't work out well. The founders didn't get along. The market didn't realize what. No, there was just a lack of appreciation for what the company is building. There's so many pressure points and things can go wrong. But learning from history is the best way to at least try to maximize your chance of success, because in our world there is no such thing as a guaranteed success. So you have to be able to be a student of history and look back and see what things have done. Now look, you can't, since you're charting a new course, there won't be a blueprint. Many times founders are saying doing something that nobody else has done before, but they can relate back to experiences from others. That's why I think the Valley ecosystem is so powerful, because you have a number of people who've been there who act as mentors. I talk to younger founders, first time founders, and one of the best things they have done that I really appreciate is they've built from very early on a strong network of mentors that can help them in different areas. Is my go to market right? Is my business model right? Am I hiring the right kind of people? At what stage of the company am I hiring the right kind of people? When I am at 10 million in sales, this is the best VP of sales I have. But is she going to scale when I'm at 100? And so the good news is you don't have to know all the answers. You can study some of the mistakes, but you also have a network if you build the right network. And I've seen people be very generous with their time, frankly speaking. Folks who've been successful in the past, you have to find their way through them, but you build your network, you get advice. You don't rely on one data point, but by the time you have a good network, you have multiple data points that you can rely on. And that again helps you maximize your chance of success. Because nobody has seen exactly what you're trying to do, but everybody has seen some parts of what you're trying to build, and you take from that, and then you chart your own course.
And I think, building your network, building that relationship is important. What advice do you have for people who's just starting, and especially somebody who is technical founder, to build that relationship? What's the best way to do that? I mean, building a relationship is almost, I try to teach that to my kid, and, for all the friends that he has. And like, I think it's so important. Some people love it more than others because some people gravitate towards that. And for some people are not, doesn't come natural to them, but that is so important, right? And how do you do that? Do you have like a framework?
I think my biggest framework for doing that over my career is, again, it's kind of hard to say what your starting point is, but it does come with one of my core philosophies, which is it does not matter who the other person is, what time they contact you. If you are nice to them, you treat them well, you hear them out, you can say no. That's fine. No is a perfectly right answer. But you tell them, no, I can't help you, or I can't fund you in any given point in time. I've built a very, I would say, good network by always giving some of my time. And I think what I've realized is over time, I can call on those people and they will return the favor. So, what you want to build a relationship is you don't expect something in return that day, and you don't expect something in return any day. But if you've treated them right, you've given them the time, and you help them when you had the opportunity, at some point they will help you. And I think that's been very successful for me from a network perspective. I have friends who I've built relationships over 15, 17 years where there was no expectation that there would be anything returned at that point in time when we had the first interaction. But we have built up trust. You do things right by them, and those relationships really really come in handy as you sort of progress in your career, both as a VC or as a founder. I think as a founder, you have to be more deliberate, though. You have to do that a lot more deliberately. As a technical founder, it's harder. So that's why co-founders are for. You have to team up with a good co-founder, I think, who may be better at that part of the process. Again, you have to pick and choose areas where your superpowers are, and then somebody else you can team up with where they are better at it. And the combination has to sort of work in all those areas.
I mean, it's so important, relationship. And it also make you feel good to live in this world when you have a good relationship with many people in your life, I think. Whether be starting a company or not starting a company. Okay, I want to have one last question. I promise this is my last question. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs uh, if they want to meet with you or get funding? Well, in your case, it's like you're much further along. I guess more like looking for funding from early stage investor.
Yeah, look, I think it's same with me also. I mean, I don't think it's any different. It's like if you, I tell people, you founders, as long as you've done the homework of figuring out, why you're meeting this particular VC. Now, look, you can always send your pitch deck to 50 people and hope that one or two respond. But I think the better way to do it is understanding your audience. Why are you meeting a specific partner in a specific firm? What can the firm bring to you? What do you think they will see in you that they have? What is the pattern that I think they have done in the past that you're going to sort of also fit into that a little bit? You always have some outliers, but you got to fit into at least what they fund. You can't go to a consumer, VC with an enterprise software pitch. So these are small things, but when I was at Microsoft, people used to come pitch to me as M12. I used to say, look, you have to do your homework. Can me as a VC representing Microsoft help you in what you're doing? And if I can, if I have a specific edge there and you want that help, then that's a great match. Otherwise, may not be a good match. In SoftBank, it's a little bit different. You're looking for growth capital. Don't come to me if you're looking for $10 million, because it's at that point in time I'm not the right fit for you, and you're wasting your time, potentially wasting my time as well. At the early stages, same thing. There is so many VCs now, but it's incumbent upon you to do the hard work of understanding your audience and then finding relationships, using your relationships and finding a warm referral. It is so much better to go into a pitch or meeting where somebody in your common network has said, he or she that you're going to meet, I recommend because this is a good person in whatever dimensions that you want to. So it is easier to make that connection when you go in with a little bit more of a warm referral rather than come in cold. So I think, but you have to do some work on this. That's why I said, like, it's just like, don't try to set up a meeting without doing any homework, without getting, sort of all the right things in place, because, maximize your chance of success in that one meeting, because that one meeting will lead to the next few meetings. If that one meeting does not work out, then you lost your one chance. So timing is also important on that. Don't go prematurely. Go when you think you're in the right stage for that specific VC or capital provider, and then you'll get a better shot.
That's great. Well, thank you. Thanks so much for your insight, and thanks for sharing all your tips.
Thank you, Christine, for hosting me. Appreciate it, and hope to meet with you in person at some point.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We want to thank our executive producer, Herminio Neto, and our podcast engineer, Andrew Rojek. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. The Health Technology Podcast is available on all major platforms.